We all search for that spark which fuels our desire to fully engage in our lives. We look for the courage to experience moments where we can come alive instead of watching life pass us by. You're listening to the Front Row Factor, leaving fear and insecurity behind by exploring stories of top performers that are living life in the front row. Get ready to stand up, step up, and live it up with your host, John Vroman.
What's up, Front Row friends? John Vroman here, and we're back with another great show for you today. I'm talking with Teresa de Grobois. Now, this is the author of Mass Influence, and this book was awesome. I just devoured it. I filled my journal up with notes. I put signs up on the wall. It was very influential for me. And as somebody who wants to make a difference in the world, and I'm guessing if you're listening, you're somebody who wants to make a difference too, this is a woman who can help us figure it out. She is somebody that helps entrepreneurs and large companies understand how the local word of mouth becomes an epidemic. And I really enjoyed our chat. We talked about the difference between positive self-promotion and bragging. We talk about how to figure out what problem we really want to solve in the world. We're talking about how she moved from one of her worst years ever and moving all the way to becoming an international best-selling author and a sought-out expert on the topic of influence. We even get into a fun conversation, which was total shocker to me, about hashtags and how they're used in emergency situations, and that deals with influence. So that and so much more. We give you practical strategies which you can apply today. It's an awesome show. And if you're digging Teresa, make sure to check out massinfluencethebook.com. Check out the 30-day influence challenge. But ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, my interview with Teresa de Grobois. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am here with Teresa de Grobois. Did I get it?
You got it. Wow.
All right. I've been rehearsing it in my head, and I was like, I should have asked you in our little pre-warm-up, but I was like, I'm just going to roll the dice. So
they would have welcomed you with open arms in Paris
all
with
right,
that pronunciation.
good.
That was awesome.
And I don't know if you know this, but I was just I was in Paris about 10 days ago, wow. I say that kind of with a little bit of a heavy heart.
Oh, no kidding! It's crazy what's going on there right now.
We were for 5 days, and we had left 2 days before the tragedy there. Teresa, I'm so happy to be with you. And I, for those listening right now, I am looking at Teresa, and she has this radiant smile, and she just brings this light to the room. I'm so grateful for our time. I told you moments ago that I'm a big fan of your book. We're going to be talking all about your life today and influence, and this is a topic I'm deeply passionate about. So this is really an exciting opportunity for me to connect with you. And from the minute that I met you and spoke with you on the phone, you were immediately coming from a place of service and wanting to add value. And I just felt this energy from our conversation that almost instantly in my head, I said, I'm probably going to be great friends with Teresa for a long, long time. And I bet that I'm not the only one that ever felt that way. So welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
That's not the intro, by the way. I've already given your intro as I re-recorded this, the whole thing. So wait for that. But I will tell you this. I want to dig into, first of all, just a quick version of your life story so people know a little bit about you that don't know about you already. Because I know you have a big fan base, but there are folks who are listening who are getting Teresa for the first time. So take us back to a 2-minute life story. And then when you get to the present moment, I want your 60-second highlight reel. I want to know what you're excited about right now. This is the shameless self-promotion, right?
I love it.
From the book. I'm just getting little teasers for the book later. All right.
Cool.
Take it away.
Okay. So how do I give you the Cliff's Notes version of my life? Wow, what a great question. You know, a lot of people are kind of born hardwired, knowing what they're meant to do in the world. I'm of the other camp where I had to kind of stumble into it. You know, my early career, I actually came up working initially in environments, then moved into management systems, and then ended up being a business expert because, of course, it's not a far leap from management systems to business expertise. But I was working in the oil and gas industry, leading huge multi-stakeholder initiatives, doing a lot of things to really influence change and get things shifted in the world. But I wasn't loving it, and they often say the thing that will most prevent you from living the life you really want to live is a good job. Because, when your life is a disaster, it's easy to change. When your life is just okay, making that decision to really shift and go for exceptional and go for, oh my God, I so love my life, I can't believe it, is a lot harder,
Right.
But fortunately, I can say fortunately, about 12, 13 years ago now, I had what I now affectionately call my really bad year. And in the first 6 months of that year, my father had passed away, my business at the time had failed, my health was in a tailspin, and my marriage was ending. And, at the time, the only thing I was really clear on was how incredibly unhappy I was. I had all the outward trappings of success, the great 6-figure income, the beautiful house, the nice car, 2 healthy kids, and I was absolutely miserable. And I can remember a specific moment. You asked me to talk about one of those perfect moments, right? And I'm sitting on the bathroom floor of my new condo, surrounded by tools, because I've always been a renovator, and the bathroom is going to be my latest project, And it's 1 a.m. in the morning, and I'm bawling my eyes out because the only thought in my head is that it's me that needs renovating. And it was such a great moment because in spite of the pain I was in at the time, it was like a moment of decision. I'm going to be my next project. And it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me because I made the commitment right then, right there, that if I was ever going to be truly happy, I had to stop worrying about the outward trappings of success and really figure out what really stoked me up in my life. And so I started doing every self-help course under the sun. I got a lot more serious about my health. I started meditating, doing yoga, and my life started to change, And the interesting thing is within a couple of years of that time, my life was so radically different. I had started a charity to build schools in Africa. I had written 3 kids' books to raise money for that charity, and then 2 really interesting things happened. The first was I very quickly realized that I didn't like being a children's author. I've always liked writing little stories for my kids, but going around to schools and doing kids programs it was okay. I didn't mind it, but it wasn't really lighting me up. And at the same time, I had dozens of people coming at me going, whoa, 3 bestsellers in 8 months. How the heck did you do that? And would you show me how? And how did you create all this energy around your work? And I was mentoring all these people for free and loving it. And I remember I was having a cup of tea with my best friend, Sean DeParron, who's also an international level speaker. And some of you are probably familiar with her work. And Sean's just chuckling at me while I'm venting over this cup of tea one day. And she says, honey, if the universe is sending you a flood of something you love, maybe you should pay attention.
Good advice.
And, it was another one of those great light bulb moments because I realized in that moment that, like fish don't know what water is, I didn't know what I was really good at until other people started pointing it out to me. And I rebranded myself overnight and had energy and people and love coming at me in massive quantities ever since. And I've never looked back. My life has been totally on fire since I really got it.
That's so cool. And speaking of fire, right?
Yeah.
What a great transition into the book is this wildfire concept. And I really enjoyed that part of your book. And maybe you can share with us a little bit of the highlight reel, what's happening now in your life, throw a little of the book in there because for those of you listening, I see it behind you right now. Mass Influence. It was excellent. I devoured it, and I just really appreciated, especially the concept, which we don't have to talk about it unless it's a perfect fit, but this idea of how a wildfire spreads and like what you need in order for that to occur. And it was just such a perfect analogy. So maybe we will get to that since we've teased it enough at this point.
Sure. I love using the analogy of wildfire. It's actually a very personal analogy to me because, a lot of people don't know this about me, but I'm actually a backwoods girl. I'm not just from Canada. I'm from northern Canada. I used to spend my summers in a remote boat access cabin. And one of my summer jobs as a high school student was actually running groceries to fire crews. And so I got to see a lot of wildfires up close, and they're scary and devastating things. And at the same time, they're amazing forces of change. And so they make a great analogy for how word of mouth tends to work, right? And you talk to any fire ranger or anyone who knows the forest at all, and they'll tell you a wildfire needs 3 things: spark, fuel, and wind. And so the analogy is just this: the spark is what problem do you solve for the world? And when you think about it, a big spark catches easy, right? Think about what it would take for a 28-year-old fresh out of Bible college to become globally iconic, right? Of course, I'm talking about Martin Luther King Jr. When you're really doing something that's of service to the world, it catches on like wildfire, right? The fuel is how passionate are you about it? Are you really doing something you love? It's a lot easier to become influential when you stand in something you're completely fired up about. I understood how influence worked long before I became an expert on teaching thought leaders how to become influential, but I wasn't totally passionate about it. So moving into the realm where I could put a book to bestseller in 6 countries, it's amazing that that's happening right now, by the way. It's been pretty miraculous.
Congratulations.
But yeah, thank you. That really took me stepping into something I was completely fired up about. And so the fuel is, how passionate are you about what you're doing? And then, of course, the wind is all those relationships you have with other people, because you can't make yourself famous or influential. You need other influential people to do that. And so, one of the reasons I wrote this book was I saw a lot of good people, a lot of everyday heroes that were tripping themselves up when it came to building relationship with influential people, or tripping themselves up when it came to really standing in what they really wanted to do in the world. And it's because all of us, good people all over the world, are hardwired to have inner conversation that stops us from becoming influential. Most of us invented it when we were 2 or 3 years old. And, it might be I'm not smart enough, I'm not important enough, I don't have enough credentials, no one's going to listen to me anyway. But we all have some version of that inner dialogue that stops us when we think about playing a bigger game and doing something that's really of service to the world. And I really wanted this book to get out there because, really what's at stake, John, is that the only people that don't have that inner conversation that would stop them from stepping into leadership and becoming highly influential are, in fact, sociopaths. So when you see a good person in leadership that's really stepping out there, they've learned to overcome their inner dialogue. And, really, that's the world I want my grandkids to grow up in, a world where good, everyday people learn how to step up and create shift and positive change in the world.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that you just said that, because I'll save this thought to the end. So yeah, I'm gonna save that one. But wonderful explanation there, and I love the analogy. It's wonderful. There's so much I want to talk about with the book, Teresa, and if it's cool, since that's what's hot and new right now, can we spend a few minutes on that?
Sure, absolutely.
So one is the opening of the book, where you talk about this belief as a 2-year-old.
Yeah,
you could tell the story better than I can. I want to tell the story, but can you give us a quick overview of that belief that you had at 2 and the impact that it had on your life?
Yeah, when you can really start to see where your inner dialogue first came from, it's very powerful, because you can really start to get that sometimes you've got a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old running the show.
Yes.
Right. And, I can remember some of the most significant moments. Actually, I'll tell you a different one than the one that's in the book, just so I don't ruin the book.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. I like it.
But, one of my most significant inner conversations happened when I was about 3. And, of course, we used to spend our summers just my siblings and I in a remote backwoods cabin. So, you had to become friends with your siblings, right? And I was the youngest, so I was always trailing along. And one year we were just back from the cabin, and we're standing in the kitchen of our 100-year-old house, so tiny little kitchen. All the cousins are visiting, so the kitchen is literally packed with people. Everyone's buzzing with excitement because my grandmother's going to take us to the movies. And that's like a big deal, because my staunchly Catholic mother, seriously concerned about the morals of Hollywood movie makers. But somebody's managed to convince her that Walt Disney's not the worst guy in the world. And so she's letting us go see The Love Bug. And I look across the room just in time to see my mother say, "Teresa can't go, she's too little." And 3-year-old me is utterly devastated in that moment. And I make up, I'm too small to play with the big kids.
Wow.
And that stuck, right? And, the interesting thing is when we tell ourselves something like that at a really young age, and that inner conversation sticks, we start doing one of two things, right? I start spending all my time either desperately trying to prove that it's not true, that I'm not too small to play with the big kids. So I become an overachiever and always trying to do things that are much older for my age. Or I spend my time being desperately terrified that it's true.
Yeah.
And, the interesting thing is your inner dialogue, it's not good or bad. It just is. Right. And, I'm too small to play with the big kids. It can get in the way every time I walk on stage. Right. Can you imagine walking on stage in front of 1,000 people and having, I'm too small to play with the big kids come up? That doesn't work.
Crazy.
And at the same time, I'm too small to play with the big kids motivated me to become an expert on influence, to become someone who steps into creating big initiatives that, address global change. Actually, we're doing one right now around hashtags and the use of hashtags in emergency situations, like what happened with the ISIS attacks on Paris. So I'm too small to play with the big kids is always motivated to step into the bigger game.
Right.
Which is a great thing about my personality and who I am. So, a really good thing to do to come to peace with your inner conversation is, and here's a takeaway your listeners can do if they want. For the next week, journal your inner dialogue, right?
Yeah.
So anytime you think about where you might want to step into a bigger game, maybe it's speaking at a bigger event or going on television or radio news, or maybe it's starting a big initiative you've always thought somebody should start. But when you think about that, what's the inner conversation that comes up? It might be, I'm not smart enough. Nobody will take me seriously. I'm not loved enough. Whatever that is, journal where it hurts you and journal where it helps you. Because you can bet that inner dialogue caused some pretty cool things in your personality too, as you were trying to correct that situation.
Right.
And, the way to really come to peace with your inner dialogue is to fall in love with that inner child who created it. When I walk on stage in front of 1,000 people or 2,000 people, if I'm too small to play with the big kids comes up, I just imagine I'm channeling a 10-year-old older version of myself. Like I choose a 65-year-old version of me. And I just have 65-year-old me turn to 3-year-old me and say, it's okay, little Tessie, I got this one.
Yeah.
You don't have to talk to these 1,000 people right now. I got this one. And when you think of an older, more confident version of yourself standing there talking to the inner child, it dispels that inner dialogue really quickly and helps you powerfully step into those roles of influence.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. I love the idea of powerfully stepping into the roles, because in so many ways, that's what we want to share in the front row community constantly, is this idea of moving from the back row to the front, which involves mostly inner dialogue. It's the comments of, I don't deserve the front row, or what if I get in the front row and I block somebody's view, or what if it's scary in the front row, gets aggressive in the front row. There's so much inner dialogue. What's interesting about the journaling, and I want to comment on this, is that one of the things that stopped me from journaling my inner dialogue in the past is the inner dialogue that says, if I actually put my inner dialogue in a journal, somebody might find it and realize how messed up I really am.
I love that.
Because we always think about the journal being something that when we pass away, somebody finds it and they're like, we have to publish this. These are like filled with one-liners that change the world forever. And, gosh, this should have been a book. And most of my journaling is like rubbish. And it's like, I hope nobody ever finds this, because if they do, they're like, I thought John had his stuff together, but clearly he didn't.
And I love that you bring that up as an example, John, because, when you think about it, your listeners and your viewers are going to look at that and say, wow, that's so powerful how he just told on himself there. And, anytime you think of someone powerfully telling on themselves, it doesn't make us look bad. It makes us look confident and human, right? Our greatest leaders, even Martin Luther King Jr., before he gave his biggest speeches, admitted his fear. I may not get there with you. I think they might shoot me for this, and his fears were very real. The reality is, when you step out and do something really worthwhile for the world, people are going to criticize you for it.
Yes.
I've been really fortunate. One of my mentors is actually Randy Gage. He's, one of the top speakers in the world right now. He's been one of the top authors on New York Times. And I remember I was talking to Randy on the phone one day because I was stepping into a much bigger realm, and a lot of people were criticizing the way we were doing it. And he just said to me, Teresa, if you don't have haters in the world, you're not doing anything worthwhile. He said, the people who stand in the biggest problems, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., they got shot for the stand they took for the world. And he says, not like I'm telling you to go and get shot or anything, but he said, take the fact that there are people criticizing you as a signpost that you're doing something worthwhile.
Yeah.
We're actually standing in that this week right now. I've got a real life live example I can give you because, imagine for what's been happening in Paris in the recent weeks with the ISIS attacks. And, there was a real problem with what happened on social media with the use of hashtags. Because I just want you to imagine for a moment, you've just left your Friday evening sporting event or your Friday evening pub with friends, and there's bombs going off and bullets flying, and the police are telling you to clear the street. They've shut down transit, and a lot of the roads are closed, and you don't know where to go. And people are turning to social media to get information on where to go. And it takes, a certain amount of time for the locals to figure out, let's use the hashtag Porte Ouverte, which just means open door in French. But the locals start tweeting out, Porte Ouverte, come to my house, and with their address, so that people know where they can take shelter, because no one knows where the terrorists are. They just know there's bullets flying and bombs going off. The rest of the world watching this starts picking up on the hashtag Porte Ouverte as the hashtag to talk about the crisis in Paris. And everyone starts using Porte Ouverte as the hashtag to get information out about what's going on in Paris right now. And the information on where the safe havens are gets drowned out in the conversation, and local people are still having trouble figuring out what houses are open and where they can shelter off the street. It was a real-time live problem because no one knew what hashtags to use, and the rest of the world didn't know how to respect leaving those hashtags alone so people could get to safety.
Oh, wow.
So one of our EBC members, Catherine Sakely-Stevens, was so upset about this happening that she came to me and she said, Teresa, we need an EBC initiative to teach the world how to appropriately use hashtags in an emergency situation. So she's written an emergency protocol. You can go see it. It's called emergencyhashtags.com.
Interesting.
And in the coming weeks, we're going to be pitching media and sending out to mayor's offices all over the world. We've developed a protocol just to say, for your city, you would use open door and the airport code of your city. So, for example, Los Angeles would be open door LAX. Calgary would be open door YYC. If there's a safe haven call or a safe haven offer in play, or you would use responder if, for example, we're dealing with something like a ferry capsize and people are needing to get there. So it'd be responder YYC or responder LAX. But we're developing a protocol that we're trying to get the information out about internationally through the media and through social media users. So we're going to be sending that out in the coming weeks. Now just watch what happens with Catherine Sakely-Stevens, because she is standing in a really big problem. How do we get people to safety quickly and have the rest of the world know how to support them? And I'm willing to bet this one's going to go globally viral. In fact, I'm not betting on it. I'm going to make sure it happens, because we shouldn't be talking about this stuff while the crisis is underway. We should have this plan. And just like people know to call 911, we should know what to call on social media when we need our community's support.
Wow. It's so fascinating, Teresa. That wasn't even on my radar in any way, shape, or form. But the more that you talked about it, the more I understood how that could be a real issue and why, she's able to stand in a real problem and help out. That's a big part of your book, by the way, that I really appreciated. Something I struggle with personally. And I wanted to ask you this. This is a selfish question just for me. I'm sure nobody listening is dealing with the same problem, and this will benefit nobody. Totally kidding, right? I think so many struggle with this is figuring out what problem you want to solve and who you want to do it for. Because the easy answer is, well, I want to solve lots of problems for lots of different people. And especially in my topic and what I want to do, and currently writing the book, The Front Row Factor, people are like, well, what problem does it solve and who is it for? And my closest attempt at that is when I speak on college campuses. When I wrote Living College Life in the Front Row, it's all about engagement. I solve, students who are not engaged, wanting to get engaged on campus, which is a real problem. And I'm doing it for students, obviously. Now, outside of that world, the rest of the world, I want to talk to people about engagement, the idea of somebody being a spectator in their life versus being an active participant. So my book is really about courage, but who it's for has been more difficult to define. How do you help people that want to influence the masses, but they feel like their topic is too vague? Or like sometimes it's like, my topic is like, what type of speaker are you? You're like, I'm an inspirational speaker. I want to inspire people to be more courageous. And you're like, yeah, I don't. That's a tough one to sort of categorize or pitch, or to understand.
Yeah. So that's a great example. And I love it that you're being vulnerable and letting us use you as an example, right? Because the problem you're standing in is a big one, right? Because for our world to be successful, individual people need to learn to be successful. And the first step in any success that a lot of people don't get is do something you love. Because that's all about authenticity,
yes.
Right? And I mean, there's a lot of different definitions out there about what authenticity means. Here's mine. Your inside voice saying the same thing as your outside voice.
I love it.
So if you don't love what you do, you run the risk of being inauthentic everywhere. That's why the salesman at your door lands schmarmy when you can tell their inner voice is saying, oh God, I need this sale. And their outer voice is saying, this is a really great vacuum. You should buy it. Right? And so we all know, we've all experienced that smarminess in others. And so if you're not doing something you love, something you're totally excited about and stoked up about, you run the risk of having that disconnect that other people will see as inauthentic, right? But, when you think about the most influential people at our time, there's a distinction between what the stand of your life is. Like, what does my life stand in? What am I a stand for? And what's the specific problem you solve in any given moment? Or what's the specific problem, which is the brand of my business, right? Like, let me use Martin Luther King Jr. as an example again, right? We know his life stood for racial equality, but he gave very specific problems for very specific groups of people that we could get behind, right? His target audience was Montgomery, Alabama. Let's boycott the bus system and get a fair bus system here in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, by solving that one problem so powerfully for a very specific group of people, he caught the attention of the global media because he was so passionate about it, right?
Right.
But it was a very specific group of people and a very specific problem. That was one of many. But when you look at everything he did, they were very specific issues that he went after, right? But they stood for the broader learning that the society needed to have. So I like to think of it almost like trying on coats, right? Like if your target audience is university students, or I know you also do a lot of work with men in corporate, men's audiences, what's the biggest problem they have going on right now in that environment? Do products or courses or videos that are specifically aimed at that, right? So an example might be, I have a product for middle managers or people who want to get into middle management on how to be more influential within your organization, right? Now, that's a back row to a front row conversation, right? If you want to step up and become more influential, you need to learn, how does the influence game work?
Yes.
How do you get past the gatekeepers? What are those tough conversations, whatever? So that would be an example of a specific product that you could do that says, I solve this problem for this group. Similarly, university students, what's the thing they most care about? How to nail the job interview, how to get a good job, anything like that, right? Now, there's a whole conversation around sitting in the front row of your life in order to nail the job interview.
Yes.
If you're really clear on what jobs you want and you aggressively go after them by finding mentors in the city and phoning people and getting their advice, if you really want to be one of the top aeronautical engineers, go find someone who's a top aeronautical engineer and see if they would be willing to support a student and buy them coffee and passionately go after that role. That would be an example of the type of product that you could target that solves a specific problem for a specific audience.
That's right.
That still lives under the umbrella of how do you live in the front row. I love your brand, by the way. I think it's brilliant.
Thank you.
And it's very aligned with influence building principles. But how do you do that, right? Because one of the places that we're really authentic in life is when we really are pursuing our dreams, which is really everything you teach, right? And that's a big part of my book. That's why, a part of authenticity for me is I'm really intentional about what interviews I do, right? Because I never want to come on somebody's show if I don't authentically respect and admire their work, right? I would come on your show any day of the week, John, because I know the stand you are for not only people becoming successful in life, but people living their passion, which means we've got more successful, happier people on this planet. How cool is that? That's the planet I want my kids to grow up on, right? So, when you think about what you teach, think about who is in the front row of your theater there supporting you.
Right.
Right? And that's a really important conversation to have around authenticity. And part of being in the front row of your own life is deciding who's in your front row, right? Because nobody does it alone.
Yes.
You want to align yourself with other awesome people of similar beliefs, of similar passions. If you're out to change the world, align yourself with other people who are out to change the world. If you go and give that idea to somebody who's completely dead, they're going to say, oh my God, you should go work for the post office because I hear they pay well, and don't give up on your life, follow it passionately, right? And I'm preaching the converted because I know this is what you teach.
Yeah.
But teach it inside of specific problems that people perceive themselves as having in a specific context, and you'll be a lot more influential and have a lot more people come to you.
Yeah. And I think the one thing I'll add to that I get hung up on, and I'm sure other people do too, is always wondering if it's a big enough problem or if it's going to make a big enough difference in the world. And we get busy measuring ourselves against others. And I think it's a good reminder to everybody that it's just important to start with something, solve that problem. After reading your book, I hung up on my wall. It's right here. It says, what problem will I solve and for whom?
Yeah.
And I want that to be a daily focus of mine. And I think that your book really helped me to get there.
And the one thing I would say is, get out there and piss people off. Pardon my language, but piss people off. Because if you're not doing something that's a big enough problem that you're going to annoy at least a few people, you should see the criticism we're getting around creating a protocol around hashtags for use in emergency situations. Who are we to do this? We're not government. Who are we to do this? We're not the biggest users on Twitter. My Twitter following is only 250,000. There's people on Twitter who have followings of 80 million, right? There's a lot of reasons to not do this. People are saying, don't do it, right? And it's bring it on. Let's have this debate, right? Because I would rather see people having this debate while people are safe in the streets and God forbid there's no bombs flying. We don't want to be having it while people are cowering in alleys behind the stadium in Paris, wondering how they're going to get home or going to get somewhere safe. That's not the time to have that argument, right? And if they need to be mad at me, so be it. Let me stand in that problem for a few weeks. And if somebody else wants to take it over, great. But if, it needs to get done, right? So, don't create the problems you stand in from a standpoint of worrying whether or not someone else might feel alienated or annoyed.
Yeah.
Because if it's a really big problem, even for a small group of people, the reality is a small group of people in one community means you probably got 2 million people on this planet that struggle with that same problem. That's a freaking big audience, right?
Yeah.
So stand in something someone deeply cares about. And if other people don't like it, that you didn't quite meet their needs or whatever, and they're a little annoyed, yay. Take the criticism as a sign that you're doing the right thing.
Teresa, some of the best advice I ever got in my life was actually a dating advice. And I was struggling with wanting to break up with this person that I was dating, and I didn't know how. And a woman named Sarah, a great mentor of mine, said to me, John, it's your job to be honest. It's not your job to make sure everybody's okay with that. And that was exactly what I needed to hear in that moment.
Yeah.
And it's also been what I've needed to hear to do some of the things that I've done in the last week. That advice has been echoing in my mind for probably 20 years now, which is pretty amazing.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Teresa, let's talk about a back row. We've probably already talked about these, but I want to give you a chance to, if you'd like to share another story, because we're fascinated by people's back row to front row moments, and we want to know as many of those as possible from your life. Can you think of a time when you might want to share a story with us about where you stepped up, you were a spectator or observing? It could have been a time in your life when you were already living a front row life, but there was one thing you were hesitating on, but then you took the action, you acted with courage, and life was never the same.
Let me just complete the story about Paris, of what's going on right now, because, the reason that I'm so passionate about doing this right now is that 3 years ago, I was standing hip deep in water in response to a friend's call for aid in one of the worst floods our city has ever seen. And I know this wasn't well covered in the U.S. and U.S. media, but a few years ago, Calgary had a flood that Noah would have recognized. You know, a third of our downtown core went underwater. We had 100,000 families homeless. It was actually stories of heroism just flying across the internet. It's amazing that only one person in the entire flood lost their life, quite a few people injured. But it was just a flood that completely caught people unawares. It was so far beyond anything we were prepared to address. They shut down the electrical grid for most of the city because so many of the electrical lines and quite a few of the bridges in the city were undermined. So we had military and police lines everywhere. And it was just a Armageddon-like state in our city. Let me just say that. And I remember, you know, we were on about day 7, and I was standing there, you know, shoveling mud out of a friend's basement, exhausted because we'd been up 3 nights straight trying to pump the water out of this basement. And I remember just feeling personally hurt that it wasn't being picked up in American media. And, you know, because, you know, most Canadian cities, when New Orleans happened or when 9/11 happened, we sent all our fire departments down to offer aid, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's almost like, you know, your older brother's not noticing that you're in crisis, right?
Right.
And I talk about this in the book, actually, because...
Yeah, I remember.
Because it was an epiphany moment for me. I teach We Are the Media. And I'm sitting there on a street that could easily have amazing photos that CNN would love to put up. And it's not occurring to me that I could phone CNN and say, look, our city's in crisis. I could have phoned the White House's office and say, you know, whether or not you send aid, having President Obama send a statement of moral support for our city right now would have meant a lot, you know?
Right.
Because a lot of Canadians... I mean, we're very feisty about not having people mistake us for Americans, but we tend to think of the United States as almost like an older sibling, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're family to us, you know? And
that's good to know. I really like
yeah, no, really. You know, and so like when something goes wrong in an American city, we feel it. Like when 9/11 happened, Canada went into mourning, and that's why like most fire departments send a huge contingent down to New York across Canada, right? And so it was kind of this feeling of isolation. But it was interesting because coming out of that, I realized I'm not being what I teach, you know? CNN finally picked the story up because it was trending on Twitter, and there was so many hashtags around Calgary flood that the hashtag Calgary flood started to trend. But the other thing I really learned in those moments was the importance of social media, because you couldn't get cell calls through in moments. The cell towers were jammed, but I managed to get social media posts out saying, we're at this address and nobody can get food across the police lines. If anyone can get a carload of sandwiches or anything through, you know, we've got 40 volunteers that have been here for 2 days. Can people get us food? And within 2 hours, restaurants from all over town, we had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. We had so much food show up at our location that we sent several volunteers down the street giving away pizzas and stuff so that other houses that were in desperate situations where people are trying to help and couldn't get food for their volunteers, you know, because it took 3 hours to get into the damaged, 2 to 3 hours to get past the police lines and the military lines to get into the damaged areas because they were trying to prevent looting. It was so hard to get support to the aid workers, right? And you know, those moments taught me, the importance of if you think somebody should just do something, I should do it, right?
Yes.
And if you don't understand the importance of social media in those darkest hours when we need each other as human beings on this planet, and I'm getting choked up, then you don't get who we are on this planet right now. So this initiative to create emergency hashtags is deeply meaningful to me because I've lived through it. Sorry, I need a Kleenex. My apologies.
I wanted to hand you one through the screen here. I felt helpless. Hashtag hand you a napkin. So, Teresa, thank you, by the way, for opening up your heart. I actually really appreciate the tears because it's a clue that this means something to you. And you're talking about something that, again, you've lived through and you very much appreciate both how that helped and how that also was a hindrance, I'm sure. And so a little bit of training, a little bit of standards or best practices would certainly help. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that. Very courageous of you to be taking this on.
Thank you.
And so many other things. This is really, really great. Teresa, I know that I want to be respectful of your time here. What I want to do is I want to ask you a couple of questions to kind of finalize this main portion of the interview. And then I want to get into sort of just a rapid fire. It's got some fun questions for you.
Got it.
These are sort of one word, one sentence answers. So my last couple of, I guess, bigger questions, and you could take this where you want, but one is, and this is in your book and you touch on it, and it's so important to me, and I want to hear you verbalize this, but I love what you wrote in the book. It was talking about the balance between promoting and bragging, or like this is the shameless self-promotion that you talk about. And I thought it was brilliant. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because I think so many people are hung up on this part, and I think they could really give their gift to the world. This is truly what holds people back from being in the front row is, how will I appear to others? I don't want to stand in the way of somebody else. Somebody else deserves the front row. Who am I? It's so much that goes into that. Can you speak to that for a minute?
I love the concept of shameless self-promotion. Shonda Perrin talks about this a lot in her work. And it's really the difference of where you're coming from. If you're coming from service to others, if you really are sitting in your own front row and you're standing in a big problem, then you telling other people what you do and who you are in the world, there ain't nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And you need to have the confidence to be able to say who you are in the world. That's your front row moment.
Yes.
And at the same time, when you get confident enough to talk about what you do, you don't need to, because you'll be building powerful relationships with other influential people. You won't need to big yourself up, right? Bragging comes from a place of desperation. It comes from a place of, oh, I hope they love me. I hope they like me. Your inner conversation is more about you when you're bragging. When you're shamelessly self-promoting and there's no shame in it, then your energy's out there with the other people, and you're more worried about, can they get how I can help them?
Yeah. So critical, and such an important reminder every day. I want to have something that reminds me of that, which I think is just so cool. Something that our community, Teresa, deals with, and this is off the topic perhaps of influence and on the topic of life, but as somebody who's truly embraced life in such a big way, I want to ask you this question. How do you process the fact that this ride ends for everybody? That the one thing that we all hold in common is that this is a temporary situation, and that it all comes to an end. How do you process that in your life?
I love that, because, when you know that this is a temporary situation, there's no taking this lifetime for granted. I love that quote about, I want to skid into the finish line with a martini in hand saying, woohoo, what a ride.
Right.
Like, life is short. It's really short. So, give yourself permission to go live your dreams and take action around your dreams, even if it's just 10 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Because living the life of your dreams does take action. Otherwise, you're just dreaming.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And what's one thing that our listeners can do in the next 24 hours to live life in the front row? How can they go out and begin to influence in a massive way?
Actually, here's my favorite takeaway. Can I give your listeners the 30-day influence challenge?
Yes.
Yes.
I was going to bring it up. This is perfect.
Here's
awesome.
Your 30-day challenge. You want to get in relationship with influential people and become influential for the next 30 days. Gift out influence 30 times. In other words, endorse someone, big someone up, praise someone who deserves to be praised, shout their books out, repost their blog on your social media. But every day, do one thing. In fact, if you need support with this exercise, you can actually go to our book website. We give away a recorded version of the 30-day challenge. If you just want a little daily 1-minute video that gives you an idea of something you can do that day, you can go sign up at massinfluencethebook.com. It takes you less than 2-3 minutes a day. But if you do this and dedicate this 2 to 3 minutes every day and watch where your influence is in 30 days, you will find that there's been a marked change in how other people listen to you and perceive you.
Teresa, thank you so much for that. And I'll link to that in the show notes also so people can just get quick access to that website. So massinfluencethebook.com. Very, very cool. All right, Teresa, because I know we're coming to the end here and I so appreciate your time, I'm going to fire off these are questions, fun, some interesting, some deep, some odd, but one word or one sentence is the goal, okay? When you think of somebody who lives life in the front row, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Oh, my best friend, Shonda Perrin. Go check out her website, SeanTV.com.
Excellent. What does it mean to be fully alive?
Live your dreams. Do something you love.
Beautiful. What problem do you most want to solve in the world?
I would love to see everyday heroes step into their own thought leadership.
If you had to pick one person to switch brains with for a day, who would it be?
I wouldn't trade who I am for $1 million.
That's awesome. Growing up, did you clearly know what you wanted to be or do, let's say between ages of 5 and 10, or did you figure that out later?
Didn't have a clue.
What's something fun that you've collected in your life?
Something fun that I collect. I'm actually a minimalist, so I would say I collect stories.
I could have guessed that. That's great.
And adventures. I collect adventures.
If your 20-year-old self walked into the room right now and met you today, what would they be most pleasantly surprised by?
That I no longer live in so much fear.
Wonderful. And our final question, Teresa. If you could be front row to any event, anywhere in the world, what would you see? And bonus, where would you see them?
Oh, I would go back in time and be there on Capitol Hill with Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh, that's great. A wonderful answer. And the first for us. We've never had that before, but that's a great one. You've got me thinking with that. Teresa, I want to thank you, by the way, for your time today. This has been truly fun for me. I today met a hero of mine as I read your book, and we have a mutual friend, Ronnie Lill, who has raved about you and connected us, and I'm so grateful to her and this introduction. I'm excited about our future friendship. I'm excited to be able to serve your mission. You have so many exciting things going on. The books that you've put out in the world, the Evolutionary Business Council, right, is a brainchild of yours, and that's doing important things in the world. And I thank you for that. I'm so excited about that opportunity to connect with you on that level. And what I say to so many people in my life, and that I genuinely mean this with, and I want you to hear this or feel this right in your heart, is thank you for creating a world that my children grow up in.
Aww.
And you are, what's great is maybe you said something similar to that, I think at the very beginning today. And I was like, yes, I'm going to say something. I've got something for you on that. Like, I'm coming back to that because I thank you for that. You really are creating a world that my boys get to grow up in. And since this is Team Human, and we are all connected, there is not a single thing that you can do that doesn't affect my children. And you're just a force for good in the world. And you're not only focused on mass influence, but mass influence that comes from a place of heart and soul. And like I said at the beginning of this call, when we first jumped on the phone, it was apparent that you were in a position to serve. And the reality is that there is no reason for you to have to do that for me, but I could tell that you walk the talk. This isn't just something that you write about in books. This is something that you practice in your interactions with people. And as a result of that, I'm now I'm in your front row. I'm a raving fan. I am going to be sharing your book with the community. And I just am so excited about also what it'll allow me to do within our community, that because of your book, I'm going to be able to serve more authentically. I love your definition, by the way, of authentic. That's perfect. And it's in my journal that I am holding up right now, is that definition of authenticity. So, Teresa, thank you for your time. Great energy today. Appreciate you making us a priority in your life. And all love and hugs from New Jersey.
Thank you, John. It was just a joy.
Awesome. And once again, check out Teresa at massinfluencethebook.com and make sure to get back on the podcast for Teresa's encore episode coming up soon. Adios. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Teresa de Grobois. Make sure to check out massinfluencethebook.com. Check out her 30-day influence challenge. I will be doing that starting tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. Tons of takeaways, tons of notes. Make sure to check out the show notes section for the links to the books and the sites and all the stuff that we talked about. If you're enjoying the Front Row Factor podcast, please take a moment and make sure that you've subscribed. Make sure that you're giving us a rating and a review, because what that does is helps other people say yes to the show, and that means we together get to influence more individuals. We get to share the front row mindset, which is, hey, don't be a spectator, be a participant, actively engage, be present, act with courage, own the moment. If you're enjoying time on the show, perhaps, and if you're not already a member, go to frontrowfriends.com. It's a totally free community where you can request to get access. And as long as you're willing to show up and share value and add something to the group, then you can also be in a position to ask for support and be around amazing people. As I always talk about, who's in your front row is one of the most important decisions you'll ever make. Hey, also, I want to give you a weekly dose of goodness. So every Friday, I record a 4-minute in the front row, segment. It's a video, it's an audio. We're going to post it on the podcast here shortly, but right now it's coming out via email. So if you don't get this and you want it, go to frontrowfactor.com and register to get some goodness each week. I share book ideas, documentaries I'm watching, people I'm talking to, and just basically bite-sized bits of info from real-life experiences of my own and others that will help you. And if you're excited about the front row and want to go even deeper and start talking about the charity that we serve, check out frontrowfoundation.org. But that's it for now. Can't wait to be back with you with our next show. Again, make sure to check out massinfluencethebook.com. And thanks again to Teresa for her love and energy today. We really enjoyed our time with her. All the best to you and have an amazing week. Adios.
That's all for this episode of The Front Row Factor. To discover more simple and effective ways to lead a fearless front row life, please visit frontrowfactor.com and subscribe to John's 4 Minutes in the Front Row, where he shares quick stories from real life experiences. Thanks again for joining us today. We hope our show inspires you to live big, give big, and experience life to the fullest. See you next time on The Front Row Factor.